all the shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors and all whose trade is on the sea, stood far off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning, what city was like the great city? That's Revelation 18:18. When we read of the fall of Babylon, the great city, in chapter 18 of Revelation, the words mercy, grace, and love do not appear. In this chapter, only descriptions of destruction and judgment are associated with God. For in a single hour, all of this wealth has been laid waste. For in a single hour, your judgment has come. So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down in violence and will be found no more. But where's the part about where God is love? What about meek and mild Jesus, right? What about the only verse in the Bible, for God so loved the world? Why don't we just skip the judgment stuff? The wrath and destruction stuff, the scary parts. And that is where so many have wronged the faith, wronged congregations, and wronged themselves. It seems as though entire communities of faith have grown to be centered on ignorance. We ignore the unsettling and confrontational. And we don't do so out of academic or theological learnedness. Chapters and verses about God's wrath and God's judgment are pushed aside out of selfishness. Modernity, the city, teaches us to accept only that which makes us comfortable, that which allows us to be ourselves. We're obsessed with being ourselves when ourselves are horrid, sinful selves. We have such difficulty with the fact that Yahweh, God, created everything for himself, basically because he wanted to. It's for him. So, for example, when we actually read the books like Joshua and not hide them away out of fear of discomfort, we need to do so with our heart and mind for God. Joshua is a very violent, bloody account that describes the destruction of great multitudes of people, but not without God's beautiful, perfect character behind it. Heroic, holy extermination of entire people groups is described in the book of Joshua. We are told of the central figure, Joshua, in his leadership of the Israelites under Yahweh, who assures his nation that the battles they fight are necessary and the many lives which they take are taken in righteousness. The righteous nature of Israel's conquest of Canaan stems from the facts that the territory is sworn to them by the Lord. The various native peoples were ripe for his judgment, and that God's commands and actions are perfect, whether or not the means or ends involve bloodshed. These three factors are vitally important when one works to understand the story held within the book of Joshua. The God of Israel, Yahweh, is one of covenants. In the book of Genesis, not only does one read of God's covenants, he reads of his continuation thereof. God holds fast to the covenants cut with those chosen figures of the Bible. Abraham, the father of many nations, is found to be an extremely crucial part of a covenant in which his God, Yahweh, promises to Abraham and his descendants a portion of territory which would later be referred to as the Promised Land, appropriately so. This point in Genesis is reaffirmed by God to Isaac, the son of Abraham, then to Jacob, Isaac's son. Yahweh is intentional in his words and promises and intends to keep and fulfill them through his people, the nation of Israel. It is made very clear to the readers of the Old Testament that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob wants the land in question, Canaan, to be in possession of the Israelites, and that Yahweh is not a God of broken promises. He is a God of covenant character. This particular covenant is born in the book of Genesis and continues through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and is fulfilled in the book of Joshua. The entire nation of Israel is aware of their God's promise as they dwell and wander the wilderness throughout the Pentateuch. God must deliver and plans to do so. The God of the Israelites, Yahweh, is not only a God of covenant. In reading of the Old Testament, one finds that God delivers judgment. He is a righteous judge of his creation and gives judgment according to his character and what he has asked of his people. Yahweh makes the fact plain to the people of Israel, his people, that their deliverance into the land he has promised them is not a result of their righteousness. 3 times over, Israel is told through Moses, through God, that they owe none of their fortune to their own doing. The nation is reminded that they are greatly outnumbered among the Canaanites, that their economic prosperity is owed to God, and that they are a stiff-necked people, a stubborn people. Israel is not receiving land free of charge because of their ability to follow the law, which was charged to them in the 10 Commandments in Leviticus. God knows just as well as his people know that Israel is not an exceptionally righteous nation and does not deserve Canaan, the land of promise. Only by grace are the people being led to the land, for God is under an oath, a covenant cut with Abraham. Rather, in addition to covenant conditions previously mentioned, God's chosen people are being granted this land as a result of the grave moral deprivation and utter unrighteousness of the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. The Canaanites are described as being wicked and as being in possession of cultic images and engravings, which Israelites must destroy. Not only can Israel not claim righteousness as the reason for their gaining of the promised land, Israel cannot take Canaan by its own efforts. The Lord wants to make sure that his people understand that without his infinite power and grace, they would be worthless and be of no threat to the Canaanites. It is described that only by him are the Canaanites to be destroyed. God would bring the Canaanites down and make them humble in comparison and in the presence of Israel, allowing Israel to drive the Canaanites out from the land and destroy them. Yahweh uses this massive event in Israel's history to exhibit to his people, as he does at multiple instances, that they need him, that God is necessary to their existence and prosperity. A parallel to the story of Israel's destruction of the Canaanite people groups, with power entirely coming from God, is that of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. This account, found in chapters 18 and 19 of the book of Genesis, describes Yahweh's grave disapproval of two cities defined by unrighteousness and depravity. After discussing the fate of the citizens of the towns in question with Abraham, the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire, completely destroying the cities out of wrath and judgment. When considering why God would have the Israelites eliminate so many people groups, the previous acts of God can and must be utilized to understand those later on in biblical history. We see that God, Yahweh, is not only a God of unconditionally accepting tender love, but that his character is partially defined by wrath and anger, nonetheless of a perfect caliber. With my great power and outstretched arm, I made the earth and its people and the animals that are on it, and I give it to anyone I please, declares the Lord in the book of Jeremiah. Such a passage is one of many which exhibit God's sovereignty over his creation, including who lives where and under what circumstances. When working to grasp the events which take place in the book of Joshua, this verse from Jeremiah is a great help, pointing to the fact that creation and all which is contained therein is subject to God and his divine supreme will. Another example which points to this can be found in the prophet Isaiah, in whose book we see that not only does God have power over creation, the Lord created all things for his glory, in essence, because he wanted to. Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. It must be kept in mind that creation is for God, that mankind was created by God and for God. So through the book of Joshua and its accounts, we know that God is not a gentle, tender spirit, whose goal is to accept the human race just as it is. He is love, but God also delivers judgment and wrath. To read the Bible as a piece of light literature from which we can remove the discomforting parts is selfishness. It is to give in to the perverted notions which modern thought has inserted into Christianity. It is to miss the point completely, the point that we are for God, not the reverse, that our works, our cities, our creations need to be for God.